Hey, I just realized as I was finishing up and thinking about it that I've forgotten something else that I meant to talk about. I should have made some notes probably before I started. I ought to explain where I have derived my understanding of Bitcoin. And it's in, how to put it, it's an understanding which took a long time to come to because I didn't take formal courses in university or anywhere else on particular topics. I was a historian and arts major who didn't finish the degree because I recognized it was worthless. I had no additional need for education nor a piece of paper because of what I wanted to do myself. So I gladly walked away from it rather than assuming a debt load I didn't need. Number one. So one has a second point attached to it. During the course of my original degree program, I encountered an author who I grew to really, really love. And his name is Neil Stephenson, just happens to be a graduate of MIT and a libertarian. So it gave me lots to think about. But when I first encountered him, it was with a book called Cryptonomicon, which you can access freely online, I think, from him. I might be wrong about that. I'll do another dig around for links to see whether or not I'm correct in asserting that, but I do believe that's true. Either way, I'm just looking at what I've got on the page and what I don't. Still got the clock ticking here. If I change Firefox to go to YouTube, no, I don't want that one. I want this one. I'm going to put up the text chat just in case someone comes on chat. I realized that I had people watching my stream earlier. Hi, everybody. I didn't realize you were there. I'm so flattered. 8 views already. Oh, I didn't deserve those considering how I left you hanging following the past things that I've been working on. Please accept my apology. Number two. While I was doing my degree program, I encountered Neil Stephenson, in particular a book called Cryptonomicon. And in the book, Cryptonomicon, spoiler alert, the basic story is that there are, it's split between a set of generations of a family, of a number of families which are involved from various national perspectives. So it's an international story being told from a limited number of perspectives, sometimes quite at odds with one another, and then at other points in time, not at odds with one another. In fact, they end up being on the same side, in a way, but freed of some of the bullshit which kept them apart in the past. It was bullshit, and it's been resolved as bullshit. And most of us accept this. That's the reason why the book is compelling to those that like it. It's a heck of a lot easier to read and more to the point than, say, Atlas Shrugged, if you're interested in libertarianism. But it doesn't only talk about that. It also talks about cryptography and what it will be to protect data in the future, and the fact that data itself and its protection and free access to this data or storage of data and secured data will be very, very important in terms of how the world's economy will work, and particularly how it relates to the mystical, most desirable metal that anybody ever talked about, gold. Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson. Second book by Neil Stephenson. Years later, probably, I suspect, the first one that he's written, which could be easily made into a movie and may well be bought up and produced and put out as a movie. However, there's no way that it can happen in this world's current environment. Like, the information environment of the world we're living in won't allow for it. That's the thing. It's funny because I've liked a lot of books in the past that will never be made as movies. One of them is Stranger in a Strange Land, and I had a friend who happens to be from the United States explained to me one time why it was he thought that it would never be made. And when I thought about his explanation, I said, that is a pretty good explanation. It's a book which does not lend itself to being made into a movie, is Stranger in a Strange Land. That's the first one. That's one example book. Neil Stephenson wrote a book called Reamde, R-E-A-M-D-E. this was one of his more recent books that he released, and in that book he explicitly talks about not Bitcoin, but something which is roughly, well, maybe not roughly, directly analogous to Bitcoin in terms of what it can do. And strangely, the driving action, I can almost call it a MacGuffin. This isn't a spoiler alert. This would be in the jacket of the book. Strangely, the thing which causes the action of the book to occur is the fact that a hacker group releases a virus into the wild, which is ransomware, and will lock a user's computer down with some, you have to have the particular passcode in order to get access to your own data again. So it's not data that was stolen from you, it's your own property which you can no longer access, which is being ransomed. Access to your own data is being ransomed to you. You have to pay in order to get that data. And the ransom is demanded in a specific type of currency. Guess what it is? It's the Bitcoin analog. It's the thing which is very much like Bitcoin. That's reamed. The third book, which I suspect helped me accept that I was capable of understanding some of the mathematics that are involved, is called Anathem. 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 Also by Neil Stephenson, which does not directly deal with either cryptography nor digital currencies and information technology in the early decades of the 21st century. In Anathem, we are presented a story in an alternate universe. And in the alternate universe, one of the understandings which has been limited to the inside of educational institutions and which has been prevented by the like hard nature, I don't know what the word for it, the impermeable nature of the walls which surround the educational institution in the book. But this is all educational institutions. A different class of society are the people that get educated. And on the inside of those rigid, they're semi-impermeable, no, not even semi-impermeable, they're rarely permeable is what they are. Very rarely permeable, and only on a specific, only by need of what's on the inside. Boy, I'm getting a hard time getting through tonight for some strange reason. My connection doesn't want to stay up. But anyhow, I'm only talking here. And sending bloody video. What the hell? I might have to check my streaming settings. Anywho, those three books by Stevenson, the third one, Anathem, the educational institution prevents the full knowledge. Well, if you want to access full knowledge on the inside of that institution, you have to join it, is what I'm trying to get around to saying. And most of civilization lives on the outside of those rarely permeable barriers of the walls of the institution itself. They're only too content to live in whatever the world is resulting from, sometimes what occurs inside of the mental space of those rarely permeable barriers, okay? One of the understandings which is contained in this universe of Anathem is that quantum mechanics and quantum computing by extension will allow us to cross the boundary between what exists in the world of Cryptonomicon and what exists in the world of Reamed. This is the interesting thing. Reamed doesn't get into the quantum computing aspects, which is why I say the second book I mentioned, Reamed, that's the one which is most likely going to be made into a movie, if you ask me. And I hope Neil Stephenson, I really do, I hope he gets the movie made. I don't very rarely get the chance to say that about a book nowadays, but it's got a story which I think was entertaining enough, not cotton candy, not close to popcorn. I mean, you could conceivably live on popcorn, perhaps. Was that a knock on my door or what? I don't know. I guess we'll see. My internet is bumping up and down like a ruddy bucket. That's the second point. I encountered these books by Neil Stephenson. The first one, Cryptonomicon, when I was in university. The other one sometime later when I'd left university. But the first one, point 3, the first book, Cryptonomicon, was so influential in everything else which has occurred in my life. I have to laugh now because I knew at the time some of the reactions I got to having admitted reading it kind of told me something stank in the state of proverbial Denmark when it comes to the monarchy. When it comes to the monarchy, in case you didn't hear me what I was saying there. Why do I say that? Well, I was an arts major and I was also a military historian, and cryptography in the Second World War was a big issue, one which interested me implicitly because I had always been and continue to be mathematically minded when I care to apply myself to whatever, how do I describe it, inane or arbitrary task which some pedagogical instructor had assigned to me to complete. If I was interested in the thing, perhaps I would do really good. If I wasn't interested in it, I would invariably drop it as soon as I could and never ever look at it again. So that's I'm getting around to saying what I'm trying to say about the book here. The mathematics of what was being explained in Cryptonomicon made sense to me. I could understand what he was explaining inline in the text, and yet in an entertaining manner, which didn't, upset me or cause me to lose sight of what was really important in the story. It was as I say, like a MacGuffin which kept a certain mindset interested to get through the meat of the story. Because if you want to suspend disbelief in a science fiction way, and it's science fiction, then you have to at least provide, depending on your tastes in science fiction. If you like hard science fiction, like I do, you have to show how it is that you're asserting this particular thing which is coming in the future will and can and perhaps must occur. So I went to my prof, this particular prof, a prof which I had done various levels of courses all the way up to the 4th year levels, seminar courses with. Went to him talking about how I was interested in this particular application, cryptography, in terms of how it had been in the Second World War, and also that I felt there was probably a lot to be written or said about it that hadn't already been said before, simply because of the layers of security which had been applied around the knowledge at the time. And since then, this has become public knowledge. I mean, the imitation game is partly about what I was interested in terms of how the German Enigma machine played into the false sense of security the Germans' war machine had in its ability to communicate securely, and the reality, which was their security had been broken, the code had been broken by not by mathematical means, but by mechanical mathematical means, so that it was possible to practically do away with the concept of this unbreakable code. But at the same time, they recognized, well, if we want to really enjoy the advantage of this information, we can't let them know that we know ever, or we have to find a way to take advantage of the most profitable information and then make it appear that something else had occurred. This, frankly, put my professor into rats. I mean, no better way of just explaining it. I could almost say that up until that point, they had been only too willing to keep me happy in anything that I wanted to say or do, or any opinion I expressed. But once I hit that point, from that point onward, things were different. Things were way, way different. And I experienced everything differently from the time I read that book to the time I finished it. There's no better explanation than that. It occurred during the summer. I had to think about this one. The summers of, no, not the summer. It occurred during the summers of 2001 that I read the book. And that would have been the last year I went to university. It would have been 7 years later, and I was still, puttering on through with a degree program I didn't need. Anywho, we're in Fives Day now. Point 3, my university professor of note, the one that I would probably have had to consider as my faculty advisor sooner or later, he was unable, unwilling, and frankly nowhere near encouraging when it came to exploring this particular topic line because of the implications to national security, but also because of the implications to what's on the inside of semi-impermeable barriers, like rarely permeable barriers, in terms of societal patterns or institutions or bureaucracies. I could put any number of words on it. The information which was contained within there and which had to stay within there because it was such privileged information that for it to be released willy-nilly into the marketplace would cause an adverse reaction in the population. It would not cause consumer confidence in the stuff that they're saying. In other words, and I'm not afraid of saying that anymore. I never was in a way. But I'm freed at least of most of my, how to put this, my biases that came as a result of the culture I'd been raised in, like the nurture aspect of my personality as opposed to the nature aspect, I guess. The nurture part of my personality would have been only too willing to believe in this perfect ordered pyramidical hierarchy where as above, so below, and all the rest, nod, nod, wink, wink, shake hands a certain way, blah, blah, blah. That's the way that it was, right? That's the hierarchy, the cultural nurture I'd received, and I broke away from it. Or at least I became suspicious of its motivations when I saw what the net result of its ability to do its thing was. Often totally at odds with what it said it was doing would occur. Things which were at odds with what it said it would do would end up occurring, and to me that's unacceptable. Frankly, I don't intend to say anything other than that. Frankly, that is unacceptable. That's the third item. What's the fourth item, if there is a fourth item? I think there's really 5 items to be gone over here. Sometimes I don't mean to cause extra confidence nor extra lack of confidence, or a lack of confidence in Bitcoin, in what I'm saying. But I do believe that the potential for a hoax when it comes to Bitcoins is really rather high when considered against what the logical implications of what the story as we've been fed it on the media is. If, for example, as what's-his-face on fucking Facebook was saying, whatever his name was, doesn't really matter, I don't mean to call him out, I don't mean to pick a fight with him, I'm not saying he's an idiot or anything like that. What I'm really trying to say is, if 14,000 new Bitcoins are proving something to the marketplace of potential miners, miners, then I actually feel that that's a bit of that's a misdirection from what the actual problem that is presented in this future is. If there are more Bitcoins, why has the individual unit price of Bitcoin gone up? Explain. Because scarcity determines the value alongside a demand. There's a demand for something and there's a scarcity of availability. You can only grind out new pieces of a Bitcoin so fast, says the guy on Facebook. What if you can't? What if that isn't the limiting factor anymore? What if the ability, because that's also, he was saying, well, now we think we can distribute this way, way better. Well, what if there's a type of computer now going to be available which is going to have to cost some cash value figure? Access to the quantum computer that can solve or can grind out a Bitcoin in a fraction of the time it would take a huge network of machines or a huge number of individuals' machines grinding away at it. If this new type of computer has a cash value which is like a ceiling or whatever you want to call it, the pass point, you have to put in a certain amount of money to even access this type of computer, then I suspect, well, that might be part of the reason why the Bitcoin's price has gone up, even though the number of Bitcoins has gone up. That's my contention. However, it's way more likely that a small number of Bitcoins can be actually leveraged, a large number of Bitcoins referred to, and inflation, all these three things together, will allow for the same net results that we've seen in the price of Bitcoin in the last number of days, weeks, months, whatever metric you want to use to determine the value. So let's get 1 Bitcoin in USD via DuckDuckGo. Let me see 1 Bitcoin US dollar currency. Can you believe any of these anymore? Yeah, all of these stories that I'm looking at here now. Bitcoin's worth 4,000. Why you should probably not own one. Forbes.com. Funny, right? 1 Bitcoin in USD. Look at that. Bitcoin. I bet just quote Bitcoin. Real-time coin index. Quote Bitcoin. Look. So here's some things to bear in mind about Bitcoin. One, some time ago, and I didn't pay terribly close attention to the wherefores and whys and whodunits of this story, but Bitcoin's business side, its creative end, passed from the hands of the people that had been coding it up to that time as a I wouldn't want to call it open source, but in a way, yes, as something which anybody could have access to, as again my esteemed colleague on Facebook was referring to. Any number of people are interested in becoming Bitcoin miners now. That means that there is a certain availability of access to the actual generating code of Bitcoin, the thing which allows Bitcoins to be generated in the first place. How to put this? The ability to generate new Bitcoins is understood to be at a certain limited level. It's the best way of putting it, and this is limited by the actual physical constraints of what computers can do. That's really what it comes down to. I want to see what the price of a single Bitcoin is. I suppose another way I could do this is to actually cave and go to Google. I've been trying DuckDuckGo for a long time. How about we quote Bitcoin? Eee. So that's in Canadian dollars. At this moment in time. 21,000 Canadian. It's pretty cool. Is it gone down a little bit? Or it all depends on the market you're going through, right? Or who you ask. I suspect a smaller number of Bitcoin plus inflation could equal that. In fact, I think inflation is going to demand that number gets bigger. And anybody with a head on their shoulders can recognize that. Inflation alone demands that number gets bigger. That's if we assume there's a limited number of Bitcoins available. And even if we mine a certain known rate for the next known while, there is the implication that there is not a finite number of Bitcoin available, but an infinite number of Bitcoins available. Because they can always be newly generated, or to check what this particular fraction of the number is going to be, or to figure, either to check it or to figure out what it is. So, how could it be You can't. I don't think you can actually argue it both ways. I think it's way more likely that having access to a smaller number of coins, making it appear that there's a larger number of them, and basically control of the Federal Reserve or whatever currency market you want to talk about. U.S. Federal Reserve seems to me to be the best one to talk about, and in regard to Bitcoin, because U.S. government will seize Bitcoin if it can get a chance, and has done so even in the last 6 months. And when it did do so, it reported the cash value of what the Bitcoins were at the time, and didn't explicitly name what the number of Bitcoins was. So unless you're on the inside of that little circle of understanding, you really don't get it. But now, some months later, the value of that same Bitcoin has been increased. But even though the Canadian dollar value or the US dollar value has changed by an order of magnitude or 2 or 3, depending on when you last checked, the amount of increase, the rate of increase in this is a multiplier of only 4, 5, 6, 7 times maybe overall in the same space, like in this 6 months gap. So the large amount of number is because the large jump in the orders of magnitude is because there was a large number, like it was 4 orders of magnitude perhaps in the first number that got multiplied. That's the reason why that has only gone up by a small number of orders of magnitude. But if I go back to 2008 or 2008 onwards, when Obama became president and the bailout did occur, and we started looking at what the bailout was going to total, it was billions? Try again. Trillions of dollars required, which is a hell of a lot more orders of magnitude than that. But what is it which makes Bitcoin important? 5. What is it that makes Bitcoin important? It goes right back to point number 1 again, or at least point number 2, really. It's something which I learned about in Cryptonomicon. I keep using this word thinking I know what it means, and sometimes I want to define it just to be sure. So I'm going to define it just to be sure. I'll define fungible. Of goods contracted for without an individual specimen being specified, able to replace or be replaced by another identical item, mutually interchangeable. Yes, Bitcoin is fungible in the same way that currency seems to be fungible in some cases. Many types of property is fungible, like things you can buy at a corner store. One loaf of bread should be pretty much the same as and as good as exchanged for another loaf of bread. And if we have a basis for determining what the value of one loaf of bread is, we can even figure out a barter arrangement whereby you trade a loaf of bread for some other thing without even using money, because you recognize what the value is of one or the other. Free markets allow for this thing, money, to be dispensed with altogether. You could just say, well, the hell with the money. Money could make it more fair. Money could distribute some of the risks involved with the thing money itself. And that's the reason why we've been convinced as populations all over the world to accept fiat currencies as acceptable replacements for currencies which are backed by some other kind of thing, some other fungible thing like gold or silver or what have you. I've said this before on the channel. Sometimes it is asserted or it is suggested that the US dollar does have a basis other than ink coming out of an inkwell at a bank or at some kind of bank because it's credit being issued. The basis of the U.S. economic unit is a unit of energy. It's their control of or access to specific types of energy sources, particularly carbon-based or like oil or coal or what have you. What's the fungible uses, though? What are the end uses of the Bitcoin? Not for the miner, but for humans, just humans in general. Any human being might actually have a use for an entire Bitcoin, not because it can be traded for some other value, some cash value, but because the particular Bitcoin, the thing which makes it uniquely identifiable while at the same time exchangeable, and like tradable, mutually interchangeable. It's unique yet mutually interchangeable. The thing which gives that value is that this is a very large and essentially random number, which, or if it's not random, think of it as a very large, maybe prime number, of which there are potentially infinite numbers. There's no limit to the number of possible primes. The farther you count, the farther you find numbers, the farther you will continue to find primes. They'll be spaced apart by a known gap. This can be calculated, but either way, whatever you want to say about it. The fifth point, the fungible uses of Bitcoins are way, way, way smaller. They're way more limited than gold is, and I've said that in the previous video. It can't be overstated, can't be overstressed, really can't. The real fact of the matter is, though, that Bitcoin, before it was mysteriously taken over and controlled by someone else, whoever they are, it was more like an open source type of arrangement in terms of how to grind new ones. It was a very limited amount of interest expressed by particular people until they got to understand what it was they were doing with it, or what potential uses there were for it. And so there was no need to lock down on the generation of new Bitcoins. In a sense, there was no need to lock down on it as if it were Fort Knox. It was something that needed to be protected with a large number of like a large number of people with guns or something like that. But what can you do with a Bitcoin if you have the whole thing? Or, more to the point, why was it that Bitcoin / the analog in reamed was so important? Just so happened that it was the currency of choice for the ransomers, who themselves had been engaging in some kind of a control scheme whereby an essentially random number locked out a user's computer with all the data that were on this user's computer. This wasn't a thing. Strangely, I don't want to say anything more about the book. It's probably worth reading. It's probably worth reading as reamed, R-E-A-M-D-E. I'll write the titles of the books here in the Cryptonomicon. And then there's R-E-A reamed. And then the last one was Anathema. The thing to remember with reamed is that the ransomware used this random number, locks down a user's computer. Access to the particular data which is on that user's computer is prevented until such a time as they remit the payment, and that at such time they will be given an unlock code which would restore access to their computer in a way that had not previously been done. Now, what would occur if you were able to crack that encryption which had locked down the computer? Hey, even funnier, what if the encryption which had locked down the computer had been a part of a Bitcoin or an entire Bitcoin itself? What if every time a ransomware attack was successful, a single Bitcoin locked a computer and a single Bitcoin new was created or bought and remitted for that Bitcoin? Now essentially there are two Bitcoins where there were one. It just magically doubled. To me that's profit. To me that seems like a profit arrangement where you invest one thing but then you get your investment back, and then investment back, investment back. That's assuming that all of them are locked down with the same Bitcoin. Assuming that all of them could be locked down with the same Bitcoin, then one investment of a Bitcoin which 4 years ago, 7 years ago in the past cost very little, right now it could be worth very, very, very much. But if there was a way to crack the Bitcoin algorithm and reconstitute that number, recalculate what that number must be, and put the right pieces in the right places, access to all of that data is now available, has now been restored, although it doesn't necessarily get restored for the people that are affected by it. The person who now has the duplicate, for lack of better terms, I don't want to say counterfeit, merely duplicate copy of the Bitcoin, which locked the system down. If that's what the random number came from, that's merely what I'm saying. If that's what the random number for the locking encryption came from, it could have been from something else. You could perhaps do a ransomware attack using a keyboard input. A user's computer gets infected. The user does whatever they're doing on the computer regularly. All the infection knows is, I'm going to start keylogging now, and the next 3,000 keystrokes are going to be the random number which locks down the computer. That also might occur. That could be the thing that I don't know. I'm not a part of a hacking group. But it's possible to do it that way, in the same way that it's possible to use a very large pre-calculated number like a Bitcoin to do that. In Reamed, the whole idea is to get paid in Bitcoin, which themselves can be exchanged for real-world currency and therefore property. And friends, ladies, gentlemen, people of all ages, anyone at all who is listening to me on YouTube or anywhere else, that's really what I'm getting down to saying here. This is the crux of what I'm saying, and why I mentioned PJ Proudhon in my Facebook post to my own wall long before I ever tried having a not conversation, or whatever that is, on someone else's post on their wall. And it wasn't even the guy that posted it. It was some other dude who was commenting on the fact that someone lost 50 million. 50 million what? 50 million matters when 4 trillion is required, or 6 or 8 trillion is required to bail out the system? Come on, dude. Orders of magnitude in the difference are about as large as the value of the Bitcoin at the moment. Yeah? About 5, 6, 7, 8. That's what we're going to see. I've got a strong feeling that it's the case. I have no reason to doubt it right now. I'll sit back and wait, because I'm neither mining for the Bitcoins, nor am I consuming them or using them. But I am very definitely interested in assaying the wealth. That's really the fifth point, all wrapped into one with these bunch of sub-points underneath it. I'm interested in assaying what the particular Bitcoin's values are, because if the Bitcoins are protecting sensitive data or sensitive institutions, network systems, or whatever, then you can view them almost like a token which needs to be submitted, or not, I don't want to say remitted, but needs to be provided in order to get access to this particularly sensitive data. So what would you do if you have invested in Bitcoin and you find out later that your particular Bitcoins are somehow, shall we say, tainted? The data that they have been used to protect, and the thing which gives them physical value in the real world, the reason why someone needs to have a specific Bitcoin. This is actually on the boundaries of believable and plausible as well, which is why I say I recognize there's more than one answer here, but I suspect that's actually the more likely answer. It's not that quantum computers can churn out more Bitcoins that the market responds because of the people willing to do the churning. No. Or people that think they can purchase the equipment necessary to do the churning. No. That's property. It's because more of the second case. The actual property value, well, there's a limited amount of property in real world terms. Some of it is quite sensitive data, and access to specific sets of data is what Bitcoins are currently guaranteeing. And some of that data might not be worth protecting. Oh, it's worth protecting if you're specifically interested in this thing, or this thing, or this thing. I don't want to even put what ifs for these things. Some of them may well be not only illegal, but highly immoral and considered generally evil by anybody in the world, except for the people that engage in those types of things and who feel it necessary to cover them up. If access to the data remains within the ability of people to pay for, I mean, if it costs only 20 grand Canadian to buy a Bitcoin, which potentially reveals the sensitive contents of this particular computer right now, remotely, or if it did or didn't get locked down. Part of the genius of the whole ransom thing was, it didn't only lock it down, it made a redundant copy of everything that it did lock down. So even if there's a catastrophic failure of the machine when the people try to crack it, haha. Not only that, we can back it up. We've got a backup ready to go. Remit the Bitcoin that or remit the amount that remit the Bitcoin that we've demanded from you. You get your code and your data back. They can almost call it something like theft then, couldn't they? If there was a redundant copy made at the same time that the physical copy on someone's machine got locked down. They could even call that theft almost, even though it's a copy. They do that with emails, don't they? Very interesting topic for this reason and for everything which is in the news and what causes people to panic. Why do I think it's more likely hoax? That's the reason. And it would only take a small number of coins if 50, again, I'm going to make this as bare bones as possible. If 50 Bitcoins can leverage $300,000 6 months ago, and it currently leverages several orders of magnitude more 6 months later, then it's possible, and this type of thing could occur merely because specific Bitcoins, which were known about in a specific purse, involved with a specific set of actions. If these particular Bitcoins can be not sequestered but seized, identified and gotten a hold of, then access to this particular data becomes possible, and some people don't want their data being accessed. They didn't lock it, strangely, but even if they did lock it, it still got locked out with another encryption. So that's the entirety of my Neil Stephenson reflections when it comes to where did I get the understanding to, or where did I begin to get an understanding for a lay person, because I don't claim to be an economist, nor do I claim to be the business type, other than I am in favor of the, shall we say, the invisible hand of the market doing its thing. And that, in my view, is us, people, human beings, discussing amongst themselves what they know to be true, or what they suspect to be true. And if it's a suspicion, it's generally not considered bad form nor rude to want to assay the truth, to figure out what is actually true, because the suspicion is this and the suspicion is that, and the suspicion might not be the truth. What the actual truth is can be found out and can be known, and if it can be found out and can be known, then the invisible hand is capable of regulating everything else in the market. It needs no other control than that, is access to information. Elsewise, why would media conglomerates exist? Thank you for watching. My name is James PFP. This is Part B, Banjocast 42. I'll talk to you later.